Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.
He's a multi-platform storyteller whose writing has appeared in the Edmonton Journal and Ottawa Citizen. He was a club reporter for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and he's a soon-to-be best-selling author, the author of this book, Alphonso Davies, A New Hope. I'm delighted to welcome Farhan Devji into Room 442. Farhan, thank you so much for doing this. Before we get into the book, I gotta ask you, what's this last couple of days, couple of weeks been like as you see this book start to make its way around?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's exciting. Kind of a whirlwind of emotions, to be honest with you. Like excitement's obviously the big one.
Mhm.
Pride. Like I'm kind of proud of myself for doing this. It's been a lot of work over the last two years and even more than that. A little bit of kind of anxiety, now seeing it come to life. You hope you've done the story justice and you hope people like it. But yeah, just a lot of excitement overall.
Yeah, well, full disclosure, you sent me a copy a couple of weeks back, and I've dove into the book, and it has so far what I've got to is absolutely lived up to justice
Thank
and
you.
does the story justice. So I'm really excited to have you on and chat about this. Um, the writing process of all of this, you mentioned it's been what 2 years, just over 2 years since you
Mhm.
started the writing process of it. How has that been like? How challenging was that? And the fact that you've now seen this come to fruition, what's the feeling like?
Yeah, it really has been like years in the making. Like to be honest with you, it even dates back to kind of my time at the Whitecaps, like 2017, 2018. Like that's when I first started kind of thinking about this and putting some thoughts on paper and doing some research. Obviously, it was a bit premature at that point. Alfonso was still only 17 or 18 years old, but kind of to see where his career has gone since then and the impact he's made on people around the world, like yeah, I kind of always had this in the back of my mind, and I couldn't come away from this idea. So when the pandemic hit in 2020, I really started to pursue it, and then started writing in March 2021, and ever since then, it's been like this all-consuming kind of process because his story obviously kept evolving in significant ways. Like I'll give you an example. Like when I first submitted my draft of the manuscript, like a complete draft, that was before Canada qualified for the World Cup. That was before Alfonso was diagnosed with myocarditis and things like that. So obviously these were significant, moments in his story. We wanted to make sure that all of that was included. So yeah, it's been continuous updates and edits, and yeah, finally excited to see the kind of the final product come to life.
Yeah, so at what point did it become a reality that you said, "Okay, you know what? I have to write this story. This is book worthy."
Yeah, it was in 2020, and there were a couple things there. Like obviously the pandemic hit, and that just forced everyone, I think, to reevaluate, their lives, their careers, kind of what was important to them. And I kept coming back to this idea, like I wanted to chase this kind of passion of mine, and obviously that coincided with Alfonso's, breakout year at Bayern, where he established himself as one of the top left backs in the game, won the Champions League. I think that was around the time he started doing some work with the UN refugee agency. So yeah, it really was in 2020 when I decided, like I need to give this a shot.
Yeah, and, scope-wise, like, I'm thinking, you're writing about one person. I'm
Mhm.
like, how do you turn one person, a kid still, into a novel? Like, why was Alphonso Davies worth, not a long essay? Why was he worth
Mhm.
a book?
Yeah, I think it's just because there's so many different elements to his story. Like, obviously, as a lot of people know, there's the backstory. But even with the backstory, like typically when you hear about it, you only kind of hear the same couple details, like born on a refugee camp,
Mhm.
parents had fled the Liberian Civil War. But like for me, I really wanted to kind of dig deeper and think about, okay, there is this Liberian Civil War. What caused this war? So like diving into the history of Liberia. Um, okay, they lived on this refugee camp, but like, what was life like there? Like, what did they eat? How did they? Where did they sleep? Like, how did they earn a living and things like that? So, that's just the backstory. So I tried to do that at every kind of chapter of his career, whether it's his, time growing up in Edmonton, um, his time at the Whitecaps, obviously at Bayern Munich. Then you have all the national team stuff, which ended up kind of being a couple of chapters in itself with all the success Canada's had over the last couple of years. So Yeah, to be honest with you, I initially pitched this book as a 30 to 40,000 word project, and it ended up being closer to 70,000 words. So, yeah, there was a lot of material to work with.
Yeah, I know. As I dive into it, I'm thinking, it's gonna be tough to turn his, backstory that a lot of people know into, a couple chapters. But here I am in, I think, chapter 7, and we've just started to talk about the transfer of
Hmm.
going to Bayern Munich. There's so much about his backstory, which I think is so incredible. And I've learned so much reading about his backstory. You do such a good job of illustrating, and that's actually what I want
Thank
to
you.
talk a little bit about the refugee camp and getting the access to talk to some of the people that were experienced life in that refugee camp. How did that come about and how challenging was it for you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of research, a lot of research. Fortunately, I came across, these resources where the UN Refugee Agency, which was obviously kind of running the camp at the time, they published like annual reports on all their kind of work around the world,
Mhm.
and at the time, the Buddha Buram refugee camp, where Alfonso was born, was one of the biggest refugee camps in Africa, I believe, certainly in Western Africa. So I leaned a lot on those resources, but also wanted some firsthand kind of, experiences and anecdotes. So, yeah, I ended up tracking down a lot of different people to speak to just on background, like a few other refugees who were living there at the same time as Alfonso. Some people from the UN Refugee Agency, some others who had actually been, volunteering there for various aid organizations, just to get a full picture of, what life was like there, and kind of as it was explained to me, like why that wasn't a long-term solution to kind of, raise a child.
Yeah, no, and the way that you illustrate it, like I get a better sense now of an appreciation, honestly, for what Alphonso Davies and his family, who you also spoke to, went through in order to, make what is now a blossoming career a reality. So I
Mhm.
think that part you do a really good job of doing justice. I highly recommend people check it out, if just for that part alone, because I'm already, I'm hooked and I've really enjoyed that so far. You
Thank you.
mentioned talking and doing research and talking to a bunch of different people. I you've talked to his parents, you talked to his agent, you talked to how many people did you talk to for this book? Because I
Yeah.
can't imagine how tough that would have been to track down all those people and get all those interviews.
So in terms of like specific interviews for the book, 'cause I leaned on some stuff, I'd done
Right.
previously, as well as some kind of public interviews. But in terms of specific interviews I did for the book, it was over 50. So more than 50 interviews done, mostly during the pandemic, mostly over Zoom. But yeah, that was to me one of the most kind of enjoyable things about this entire experience, was just speaking to so many different people who have been part of his life. Like, I wasn't, I had a front row seat to kind of Alfonso's um, rise in Vancouver, but I'm not like part of his story, It's like, but these people, like his friends, his teachers, his coaches. I spoke to the speech writer he worked with for his speech to FIFA Congress in 2018, who also happened to be a longtime speechwriter for Barack Obama. Like these are people who like were part of his story. So just hearing their stories and their kind of impressions of Alfonso, to me, was probably the most enjoyable part of this entire experience.
What was the most enlightening conversation you had with somebody that was part of this book, or even not part of this book, that you talked to and you said, "Whoa, that's something I didn't know," or "Whoa, that's really cool that, I'm hearing that side of the story."
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. There's a couple.
Yeah.
Probably some of the ones I referenced regarding the refugee camp and just
Yeah.
really what life was like there. Like those were, to me, that's where I kind of learned the most, because I didn't know that part of the story. So, those come to mind. But also just from like a, obviously, as a soccer nerd, like I really loved kind of diving into the transfer, as you alluded to that chapter, and just getting kind of different perspectives of what was happening at that time. So, not only speaking from like to Alfonso's agent, but also getting the perspective of Bayern Munich, getting this perspective of the Whitecaps, and of teams who were chasing him, who ended up didn't getting him, like Stuttgart and Manchester United. Like speaking to people from all those kind of different perspectives, like I feel like gave me a good like complete picture of how crazy that time was for Alfonso.
Yeah, and I loved the way that you were able to illustrate Alphonso Davies' personality. I think you also do a really good job at doing that because, from the outside looking in, what we're able to see when he's on Twitch and when he is, even sometimes doing interviews or when he's on the field joking around with the camera's catches, such a joyous person, a guy who is really outgoing, a guy who isn't afraid to speak his mind and really, exudes just pure happiness. But there are also times where, as you illustrate in the book, that he is a quieter individual. How did you balance, I guess, illustrating that fact? Because you do a really good job. Like one of the stories, without giving too much away, like when he bumped into Roberto Carlos at the FIFA World Cup bid or whatever it was. So, what was that like for you?
Yeah, that was actually really, really interesting. Because, like you said, like people have this view of Alfonso that he is this bubbly, vibrant kid, 24/7, and he is at times. Like, don't get me wrong. Like as I kind of get into in the book, like that's a big part of his personality. Just someone who just loves life, but he has to kind of really be in his comfort zone and have that feeling of safety and security to kind of show you that side of his personality. So, like a lot of people he works with, like in terms of like his partnerships and with the UN refugee agency, like someone told me like it often takes him like 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours just to kind of come out of his shell. So there really are these two sides to his personality, and I just kind of found that fascinating.
Do you think that this book is for non-soccer fans as well?
That's something that I wanted to, I wanted it to be that. And I think it is. Like, obviously, a big part of the story is soccer. Like, we can't hide that. But just
Mhm.
with Alfonso's story in general, there's so much more to it than that. Like, it's a story of, a young refugee kind of following his dreams, a young an immigrant family, like starting a new life in Canada, and kind of the impacts Alfonso's made on those types of refugees and other people around the world. So yeah, I'd like to think there is a little something in there for everyone, but obviously soccer is a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, just a big question, if you don't mind. Just
Hmm.
how tough is it to write a book?
It was hard. It was hard. Like it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, like
Yeah.
professionally. And I'd like to think I knew what I was getting myself into, but I don't think I did. Like, to be honest with you, like it really became, like I said, all consuming. Like something you think about 24/7, and also just because like I felt like a responsibility just because of the things we've talked about. Like, it is such a powerful story. Like, his parents went through so much and sacrificed a lot, and like I said earlier, just wanted to make sure I was doing the story justice. So, definitely felt that weight. So it was a lot of work, but it was also a lot of fun, and something I definitely would have done 10 times over.
Yeah, I can't imagine the amount of hours that you spent just on your computer, typing, erasing,
Yeah,
retyping. I'm sure
yeah.
there's I mean, I struggle to write articles sometimes. The fact that you're able to turn that into a book is really commendable. And once again, I highly recommend people go out and they do get this book. Um, Before we let you go, Farhan, we have to talk about the current story that's been going around. A lot of people, a lot of rumors coming out that Alphonso Davies potentially could leave Bayern Munich this summer. Now, me personally, and this is just my personal opinion, I am 99% confident he will not be leaving Bayern Munich this summer. But are you as confident as I am, Farhan?
That's a good question. Like, I can't say I have any like insider knowledge of whether or not that what's going to happen this summer, but I can share this. I last this would have been last summer when I spoke to Marco Nepe, who's the technical director of Bayern Munich, and I asked him like, what do you think the future holds for Alfonso at Bayern, and at that point he made it clear like he sees Alfonso being and becoming like one of the faces of Bayern Munich. And he talked about Alfonso being a big part of their kind of long-term club ambitions. But obviously, that was last summer. A lot can change in football in a short period of time, as we know. There's a new coach on board, some new players within the team. So ultimately, I think a lot of it will come down to what Alfonso wants. Like, he's already accomplished so much at such a young age that he's obviously going to have options as we're seeing with these reports. So he's going to need to decide, what he wants out of his career. And yeah, we'll have to see where that goes. I kind of didn't answer your question, but that's the best I can do.
No, it's a very professional answer, and man, I wish we had more time because I know we're just scratching the surface on this story. Like I said, Alphonso Davies, A New Hope. It is going to be released to the public, I believe, on May 2nd. That's the
May 2nd.
official
Yep.
publication date. You can still get your pre-orders now, so get that in. And like I said, I highly recommend anybody, if you're interested in Canadian soccer, if you're interested in the name Alphonso Davies, highly recommend you get this book from Farhan. Farhan, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's great chatting with you.
Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.